very, very dangerous.
Get these spidey sense, I was like, oh, something's off.
And I'm just like, man, I'm waiting to hear something,
Keep that crowd warmed up. Is Mr. Yahola Tiger.
What's going on, guys? Welcome to the 10th episode of the War Cry podcast. I'm your host, Yahola Tiger. Just a guy. I guess that's my new line. Just a guy, but I had been kind of thinking about some things, and when guys know how I do. When I start thinking, I start really kind of diving in and doing research. And I've had some people ask me about this topic that we're going to talk about today, and I'm getting right into it. This can be could be pretty sensitive, and this is can be graphic as well. Very sad and tragic. I'm going to be talking about the Girl Scout murders in here in Oklahoma, in the town, the city, whatever, of Locust Grove, and everybody kind of knows what happened. I'm going to give just a brief kind of overlay. Basically, how we're going to do this is it's going to be theories, and then I'm going to review the latest documentary that came out on Hulu, Keeper of the Ashes. And then also, too, I'm going to kind of go into some things that I thought was kind of interesting. And it's not going to be in that order, but it's just that's what we're going to be talking about. And, but how this whole thing started. June 13th, 1977. Camp Scott, which is the Girl Scouts camp, like I said, near Locust Grove here in Oklahoma. How this whole thing got started is around anywhere from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. Someone, or could have, we'll get into this more, but it could have been more than one person. But some person came into the Kiowa unit, which was the most secluded unit or campground in the camp, and killed and molested the three girls who were sleeping in that tent. The location of the body was about 150 yards is where they ended up finding them. I think it was two in a sleeping bag, and one was kind of out on the ground. The victims, I'm going to give their names now. Lori Farmer, Michelle Gousset, and Doris Denise Milner. Before we get too far into it, thoughts and prayers with those families who, still are, dealing with basically the aftermath. This is almost 50 years ago, and we're still talking about it, what happened, and what went on. And so my thoughts and my prayers are with those families, because the reason why I even kind of think about doing this episode is I have a little girl of my own. I'm about to have another one too, and I think about that. We had a discussion amongst my family here in the last week about daycare, and doing summer camps, because at my employer I do summer camps. It's not a sleepaway summer camp, but it's still a summer camp, and we have kids that come in and they're in our care, and I think about that. I've since thought about that since I started doing camps, and having a daughter, I think about stuff like this, and what transpired, in this event and the events that the events that followed. But to keep it going, so around 6 a.m., Miss Carla Wilhite, she was a counselor. She discovered the three bodies, like I said, 150 yards away. By 7:30, there was about, I'd probably say a crew of local law enforcement, and they began the investigation on the scene. And then about 10 o'clock, the camp was evacuated. All the campers were sent home. And one thing too that I guess maybe doesn't, I guess it was covered a little bit in Keeper of the Ashes, but is the fact that these kids or these girls were from the Tulsa area. And so they went back to Tulsa, to their Tulsa Tulsa regional office, and by 10 o'clock. And June 13th was the last time that the Girl Scout camp was open ever. It was open for nearly. Camp Scott was nearly open for 50 years, and it never reopened. So, as we kind of get into the investigation part of this, and like I said, I'm going just a brief rundown of what sometimes I try to get this off the top of the head. Sometimes I got to look it up and make sure I get it right. So, but the next day, they had basically the crime scene was blood. There was blood in the tent, on the ground, on the wood planks, and basically they took the whole tent to a crime lab to have it looked at. But it looked like too that the way that the blood was on the floor of that tent looked like they had tried to wipe it up, and there was towels and there was parts of mattresses that had blood all over it, and basically against the wishes of the investigators, which we'll go into that too, because that's an interesting part, was basically the investigators and the press kind of having some beef, and things were getting published that weren't supposed to be published. But one thing too about when they went to look at the actual crime scene in the tent, there was a different footprint than the one that they had assumed was the perpetrator. So then the following day, the 15th, June 15th, 1977, Sid Weiss, he was the Mays County DA. He publicly outed basically the press about the shoe print, and a man is arrested about 7 miles away from Camp Scott. He was living in his car, and he is questioned, but then he's released. So that was the first suspect, and I believe that was a guy named Mike. I know I've watched a few documentaries, and that's basically they just gave the first name Mike. Like, that was it. Like, nobody, like, who's this guy? Is he homeless? Like, they didn't know who he was, so they just, in the documentary, they gave the name Mike. Well, then once they interviewed him, released him, and they kind of, got him out of the way, they turned their investigation over to the rancher, Jack Schroff, and he was under big time scrutiny there because, when they brought the dogs out, the dogs had led to the pond on his property, and they had drugged the pond and basically searched that pond over and over, and they never found anything. But he ended up getting put out in the news that basically the headline was Slayer, and they had his name and his face, and that the evidence is leading to him, and that he is the murderer and all this stuff. Well, then the next day they had to reverse course and basically say, oh, he passed a lie detector test, he's not the murderer. And a lot of this too, and a lot of the evidence, and some of the stuff that I was looking up, and a lot of the beef was like between the Tulsa World and the Tulsa Tribune, which was a paperback in the early 70s. I don't think it even is still running now. I didn't look to check, but I mentioned those dogs, and this is the first kind of weird occurrence that the investigators couldn't really wrap their heads around. So they brought these dogs. They called them the press called them the Wonder Dogs, and the Wonder Dogs were supposed to, they had cracked some case in 8 hours or something, or 16 hours in Pennsylvania, and broke the case open, and then they found the guy who killed these people up in Pennsylvania. Well, they brought those dogs down here to say, oh, we're going to make sure we'll find something in 8 hours. Well, legend has it, and this is something that has been circulating for a while, and I know that this has been published in the papers, but there was a medicine man in that area, and he had said that I'm going to curse these dogs. And the crazy thing about that is 2 of those dogs ended up dying. One wouldn't stop. The dog would not stop, and it died of basically heart palpitations, and basically the heart seized up, and the dog it just died. And then another dog the trail was sent into the middle of the road and they got hit by a car. And, that's one thing that was kind of crazy, about that whole situation. And so the wonder dogs ended up, kind of not really being wonder dogs. And this is, around the time when the name of Gene Leroy Hart was mentioned as a possible suspect. Well, Hart had escaped from Mays County like a couple years prior, like I think in '73. So, dude has been on the run for like 4 years and never been able to catch him. And they found near the body, basically it was on top of the body, where they found an old flashlight that had duct tape wrapped around it, and it had basically the Tulsa World inside of it, like a strip of the Tulsa World. And it had like a black bag around it, and it had a hole punch, so you could be you could still see, but you wouldn't be able to be seen, outside, or, it wouldn't be like far off, people be seeing flashlights and stuff. Well, like I said, those wonder dogs ended up not being so wonderful, and the two of them ended up dying, but they ended up finding, with those dogs, they ended up finding eyeglasses, and in those glasses, had been, there was multiple sets, but basically throughout the, before the camp or the kids got there, the girls got there, like for the previous week for orientation, that the counselors had noticed their eyeglasses were going missing, and they couldn't find them, and they were like, "Oh, someone stole them," or there was all types of kind of weird stuff that was going on. But so they ended up finding a lot of these glasses, up all around the campsite. And so one thing too that I think that, like I said, this goes into kind of the beef with the investigations. The investigation team, if I can say it, investigative team and the press, is there was conflicting things that went back and forth. So, so the sheriff, his name was Sheriff Weaver from Mays County. He said he found the weapon that killed the girls. Well, then a couple days or a day later, the OSBI said, "No, we didn't find anything. No, we did not have. We don't have any suspects. We're still looking." Another time is Sheriff Weaver said we found fingerprints. Oh, the FBI, all these different other organizations said no, we never found any evidence of this. Well, then the same day, June 16th, the medical examiner found out that the girls were not actually raped, and that conflicted another report earlier that the girls were. So there was a lot of stuff going back and forth. Like the investigative team couldn't get on the same page. There were so many, with this happening to young girls. This is, I think, we believe that one of the first crimes that ever occurred, and so everybody was trying to make sure they were on top of it. Well, it just was a mess. But I mentioned before when it came to like the orientation week for the counselors, Carla Wilhite, she was up on the had mentioned during the trial that there were some weird things going on, and things are getting stole, glasses. They even said, I think I lost it, but anyways, they say that there was a lot of stuff stolen. Well, that ranch, that the guy who had Stroff, the rancher Stroff, he was saying the same thing, that he was having stuff stole from him, and that basically he could never figure out who was doing it, but someone was stealing. Well, then after they had posted the fact that he was a suspect, he was getting so many calls. He ended up going to the hospital. He was so stressed out and stroked out that like this was happening, and people were calling him, talking crazy, and that he was definitely something was going on with him, and he ain't acting right, and so he ended up going to the hospital. So they kind of dismiss him once they get the lie detector test. And like I said, Gene Leroy Hart is still a suspect this time. But then on June 18th, Sheriff Pete Weaver, he announces, like I said, the murder weapon was found. Well, the district attorney and agents of the OSBI tell the press that they literally have no idea what he's talking about. And that was on June 18th. I think I mentioned it earlier. So then, June 20th, like I said, this is where the press and the investigators, June 20th, in a complete reversal from the day's previous announcement, Sidney Wise, the DA, publicly says that the several suspects in the case, there are several suspects in the case, and then there's a mountain of evidence. It is also announced that they do have fingerprints on one of the bodies. One of the two living wonder dogs, Harris, without explanation, runs into heavy traffic, and like I said, that's when. So then the next day, once OSBI comes out, June 21st, Oklahoma Governor David Bourne offers the help of the National Guard in that manhunt. Another suspect is added, and this is, like I said, that's the guy that I mentioned earlier, Mike, where he's basically was found in his car. The 22nd, they also announced that there's 2 photographs found with 3 women in the picture. Some officials tell the press that the photos were found near the bodies. Others tell the press that they were found in a cave about 2 miles from Camp Scott, which doesn't make sense. Which is which? It's kind of gets. This is where it kind of gets more like, okay, what's going on here? Sidney Wise announces that there's basically a media blackout, and this is on that same day because he feels like the press is portraying the investigators as basically dummies. And then on the same day, the forensic experts, they say that there's only one good fingerprint on one of the bodies, and the other prints are smudged. The good fingerprint is picture perfect, according to one of the investigators. So this is where the heat starts really kind of picking up on Mr. Hart. June 23rd, they find out that he is basically the one who developed those pictures of those 2 women, or those 2 pictures with the 3 women. And he's also spotted near the camp, and basically they launched a full-on search for him. The 24th of June, 200 members of law enforcement, 400 volunteers surround a 4-mile area near Camp Scott. The volunteers were not supposed to have guns, but many of them did, which is kind of wild. Like, I guess they were going to shoot him, I guess. And also some of them reported that they were high or intoxicated, and also in possession of weed or marijuana. One thing too, this is where kind of the American Indian movement steps in, and they're like, we want to make sure this is going right. Like, are we just accusing people of things? And so that's when they kind of step in, and they are trying to be basically the eyes and ears for the Native American community, and letting people know what's going on. The 26th of June, basically they leave the manhunt after 2 days, which is kind of wild too. The next day, June 25th. I thought this was kind of interesting that they had heat-seeking instruments in the 70s. I was like, dang, they whipping out that secret technology. Got to find this guy. But then the 27th, the 28th, Sheriff Weaver, which I'll detail this, I guess, when it comes to the theories. But Sheriff Weaver puts a $14,000 reward on the case, and basically, puts that bounty on Gene Hart's head, essentially saying that you will be paid if you help us find him. So then, June 29th, the FBI moves in 40 agents into the area to help with the investigation. The next day, the 30th, this is Gene Hart's mother, Ella Buckskin. She basically tells the press that she is being harassed by the police, and Sheriff Weaver is planting evidence to implicate her son. And she basically goes on to say that Weaver is doing everything in his possible power to grow pressure on Hart. But then the FBI comes in and says that they claim that they have proof that Hart is a part of this, and that he is still in the area, and he was in the area during the murders. So then July 1st rolls around, and beginning of the month, and law enforcement leaves Camp Scott saying that all the evidence was picked up. They have found all the evidence they need. They know who their guy is. They know. Well, then come, July 5th, a man matching Hart's description is spotted in the search area. The tracking dogs brought in quickly try and track the person down, but almost as soon as they pick up the scent, they suddenly lose it. And so, there's like I said, there's as you guys have heard, and like I said, as I'm covering it, there's different pressures on different people to find out what happened and what and who is involved, and they're trying their best to get their guy, and that's kind of the theme with this case. July 6th, Oklahoma State Medical Examiner releases the autopsies of the 3 victims. The OSBI director, Jeff Laird, calls a press conference and announces that there's no fingerprints on the bodies, which then reverses what the prior press release said that they put out. And his quote was what was thought to be fingerprints are not fingerprints, and then he declined to elaborate. He concludes the press conference with another rather unusual statement. This is the exact quote. I would say with certainty that Hart is guilty, because I would not say with certainty that any person who has not been tried were guilty. But we do have a great deal of evidence in the case that points to his guilt. Yeah. I when I read that, and I was kind of, like I said, doing my research, that's and I could go off on this. But that's the problem with our system. It is not in the quote unquote accused or the quote unquote guilty to prove they're guilty. That's not the point of the justice system and the system that we have in hand. You have to prove as prosecutors and as the government, as whatever it is, to prove that they are guilty. You're just defending your stance on why you're not guilty. And that's one thing that, that like I said, is another theme of this whole thing. And I'm not saying, like I said, I ain't saying anything. I'm just giving you my opinion as we break down this timeline. I just find it very peculiar because here in Oklahoma we are very this way. And I know it could be all over the country in certain states and in most states, but you're guilty until you're proven innocent, and that's not how it is. It's not how it's supposed to be. And this is exactly what I mean, on that July 6th press conference. But moving forward, so basically they upped the reward money, and there's 2 men in Florida that are encouraging the Girl Scouts and Girl Scout troops around the country to donate to the reward fund to basically add to the pot. July 29th, a private security team looking after Camp Scott sees what they think is a person in the woods. After coming back from the investigating, they find Denise Milner's shoes. This is the same Camp Scott that they just here in the last, not even 30 days before, said that there's no evidence left. We have collected all evidence. Which was kind of weird that they found one pair of, or they found the, right and left shoe in the 2 socks, but they were soaking wet and not in an OSBI bag, which was very interesting. But it was found at the camp director's house. August 3rd, the Tulsa World newspaper prints on the front page plea from the Oklahoma governor, David Boren. David Boren says, I will use the authority of the governor's office and will take any steps necessary to assure his security and a fair trial if he gives himself up. Yikes. Brutal. September 22nd, 2 of the families of the victims file a $3 million civil suit against the Magic Empire Girl Scouts Council. October 1st, a $5,000 reward is offered for information leading to the arrest of Gene Hart. The reward is made available by a group of prior residents calling themselves drug awareness. Man, this is like I said, there's a lot of this stuff too. When I was researching, I just thought it was kind of crazy. It's like I can't imagine being in the 70s. Like I have to look at things from 2023, or 1990 or 2000, because it's crazy because there's no social media. There's like obviously, I mean, I was around before social media, but it's interesting to see how people were trying to get things done back then, and it's just kind of a cool look back of how things were. And I guess the word wouldn't really be cool, but it'd just be interesting. October 10th, 1977, Mays County Sheriff Pete Weaver announces to the press that he is confident that Gene Hart is still in the area and that he is apprehended. And he told the press, we will stay with it and hunt and catch Hart. It's an investigative day and night, which that makes no sense. But basically, they're saying that they're going to catch him. December 30th, right before the new year, 2 state law enforcement agencies report that combined that they have spent in excess of $138,000 in the manhunt for Hart. Combined, the OSBI had spent $100,000, and the Department of Safety had spent $38,000. Not included in the figures the expenses of the National Guard and also the cost of the county. A spokesperson for Governor Bourne says that the state went all out and the expenses were never an option. FBI releases some composite sketches of Gene Hart along with aliases that he was believed to have. They did one with glasses and not with glasses and not with glasses. That was on January 28th. He was everywhere, and he was nowhere at all the same time. One thing I just found was kind of interesting. When you kind of look back at night, like when he escaped from Mays County in '73, and this is something that was in the documentary Keeper of the Ashes. Is basically he would escape. The first time he escaped by normal means. The second time he escaped, they could never explain how he did it because there was nothing amiss. Well, word had gotten out because there were some Indians working in the jail that he could shift. He could move his form to be smaller, and some of the jailers in there said that he could do that. Well, for the 4 years before these Girl Scout murders, he was on the loose, and he was taunting Sheriff Pete Weaver. Gene Hart was. Gene Hart would be walking down the street, and this is in Keeper of the Ashes. If you guys want to go watch it, it's on Hulu. He basically, and I think he also did this during the time of the Girl Scouts, but this is what he was doing. He was taunting Pete Weaver. He would be walking down the street, middle of the street, or walking down the sidewalk, out in the open for everyone to see him. And people would call the police and say, hey, there he is. He's right here. You have to come get him. They'd pull up, and he'd be gone. He'd sit down on the bench and wait for them to pull up. Next thing you know, he's gone. Somebody saw him on the railroad tracks one time, and there was nowhere he could there was no trees around. There was nothing. And they pull up, those police officers pull up, and he's gone. Just out of nowhere. It's like they blinked and he was gone. And they could not figure out why they couldn't find him for that 4 years. Kicking it back to April 6, 1978. At 4:15 p.m., a team of 8 OSBI agents, including Mike Wilkerson, which he's a big part of this, Harvey Pratt, he is Cheyenne Arapaho, full blood, Jack Lay, Larry Bowles, Bud Olsey, Kerry Thurman, Don Sharp, and Roger Crisco storm a house in a remote area in the southeast corner of Cherokee Nation near Bunch, Oklahoma. The residence belonged to a man named Sam Pigeon, and he was located about 45 miles from Camp Scott. Hart was arrested without incident, and he was transported into the Oklahoma State Penitentiary at McAllister. And so he was caught, and one thing too this doesn't really go into kind of what Hart was doing, but Mr. Harvey Pratt, which I think he's still active in this stuff, but in the Keeper of the Ashes, he goes into and also too, it was Someone Cry for the Children, I believe, is the other documentary that was the one in the early 2000s or the 90s. I can't remember exactly when that was, but But he had described, going out to the different bars, and he'd ask people, he wasn't from there, he ain't Cherokee, so people was kind of not really wanting to talk to him. And he had his buddies. I think Wilkerson was another guy that would always kind of tag along, and he would try to get information. Well, he had found out that that they figured out he would hole up in these caves, and Harvey Pratt was had to go do some things to make sure he was safe. And I know someone cried for the children. They had a guy named I can't remember, it was Crying Wolf, I believe was what it was, his name. He was a Cherokee medicine man, is kind of how they described him. But he said that they had to go to those means to find him. And see, technically, this is the only time in history that they've used this type of thing to find to find Mr. Hart. So Harvey Pratt went to some people in the local area and said, "Hey, I need this. I'd like to find this man, and I need things to help me find him." And he went and got, and I've heard this, when it came to Steganis, is you basically take a bullet or bullets to somebody and they do some things to it, and it helps you. You could shoot it over here, and it would still find its way to the intended target. Well, Harvey Pratt went and did that. Another thing that he went and got when he was looking for Mr. Hart was, basically tracker. It was some medicine that made you be around when you sometimes when you weren't around. Like it made Mr. Hart feel that Harvey Pratt was on him all the time, and it was that type of medicine, and he would be there. It's always almost like as if he always showed up when he was around, like he was always there. And Harvey Pratt tells a story when he was out there with his brother. His brother was a law enforcement guy too, and they were out there, and they went out there and found some caves, and they saw that there was it looked like, he said it looked like doctored cedar. And by doctored, those who know, they know. But he saw that, and then he saw fires in 4 different directions, and then he also found the newspaper clipping of the Tulsa World. Same one that allegedly matched the one that they found on the flashlight. And so he said, okay, this guy, he's doing some things. And that's when he had to go. He had to go get some help from somebody. And Mr. Pratt, he ended up, and this is, like I said, he details a lot of this in the documentary. And when he first started telling people, he's like, we have to do this. He got laughed out the room. And that's one thing that I get kind of, when I see these non-natives making documentaries of native things, I get kind of it brings kind of gets my blood boiling a little bit, just a little bit. Like it turns the heat up to like 200. Where everybody's cooking at about 98. I see that I'm about to start cooking at about 250, 300, start getting some bubbles going, But a lot of his colleagues were just like, why are you doing this? That's not going to work, buddy. Like that's not even, that's make believe. That's wizard, that's mad. That don't work. And some people called him, basically thought it was kind of satanic. And he ends up, going that route. And one night he's out there, and he says this is a story he tells in Someone Cry for the Children. And he's sitting out there with his brother, and it's not even cold outside. It's like, man, it's just pitch black out there. And all of a sudden, this black cat comes up and basically jumps on him, hisses at him, like screams basically, and it's a little, like a cat, like a little house cat looking thing. And it runs off into the woods. He looked at his brother, and his brother kind of looked and said, yeah, it's probably him. He said, why would that cat go after just you and not all of us? Or why would that cat be that way? And so I thought it was really interesting. I was like, man, that's kind of crazy because, we've all seen that. If we've been around certain places, especially when you're out on Cherokee Res, shapeshifters are, they're out there, or Stegini or Skilly or whatever you call them, they're out there. And so he knew Hart knew he was on his trail and he was close. So then I think it was Wilkerson ended up getting a kind of a person in the native community, the Cherokee community. And he figured out a way to find out who the medicine man who he's staying with. And he goes to the medicine man's wife and says, "Hey, we're going to indict everybody if we don't figure out a way to get this right, to get him." Well, they end up giving him up, and that's where, as I just mentioned, they found him at Sam Pigeon's, and Sam Pigeon was out in Bunch. My grandma lived out in Bunch for a lot of her life, or part of her life, and Cookson Hills is where she ended up residing as she got older too. So that area, along with the camp, that kind of stretches. It's kind of stretches up, and it's kind of a longer type of way, but that area is very known for those things, and it's things that you can't explain. There's been documented history of like Pretty Boy Floyd being out there, Bella Starr out there, all these outlaws who they would hide up there, and so that place, Cookson Hills, has known for that thing, and Cookson Hills also back in the 70s was known for basically being the highest amount of full bloods, Cherokees, in basically the country. And so, I mean, I don't know if it's that way anymore, but it's the highest concentration of Indians. The Cherokee Indians, I'll say, Cherokee Indians in one setting. But so he ends up getting caught. He gets caught, and they say how Harvey Pratt describes how they catch him is once the wife of the medicine man gives up his location. Leroy Hart, he basically tried to escape, and they ended up almost shooting him and killing him, but they didn't. And Harvey Pratt said he walked up to him, and he did basically let him know, hey, this is taking his medicine back, taking the medicine, giving him the medicine, and so he did something to his shoes, and that's how you know that you got him, and that's how it's done. But the trial happens, and so I'm going to fast forward to basically the state of Oklahoma versus Gene Leroy. So March 19th, 1979, the trial basically starts, and it would last basically 11 days. It was not a long trial. But there's no trial transcripts. So everyone kind of, if you've heard of this case, you know that he was acquitted. And so there's no trial transcript because of his being acquitted. But, people have tried to piece together things, and there's been people inside the Oklahoma government that have leaked certain things. And so he ended up getting acquitted, and basically 2 months later, he ends up dying. He gets sent back to prison to finish out his sentence for the previous charge of rape, burglary, all that stuff. And he ends up going to prison. He dies 2 months later. And so that kind of caps the timeline of everything that's happened. And as I've been watching different, I guess you say, documentaries or reading articles, there's one thing that's very prevalent through all of it, and that I think everyone can agree, that everyone that I've read can agree, that there were some things that weren't right. They didn't seem right. The DNA that they had captured from the scene originally, they said that it was basically 90-something% or 98.9 or whatever, Gene Hart. Well, then as DNA testing gets better in the 80s and then in the 90s, they come to find out that it's 1 in 7,000. And so there's more than 7,000 Indians around there, and that specific genetic makeup is around in that area. So that doesn't, basically, as the DNA comes out, they can't exclude him, but they can't point to him. Then as the DNA testing gets better and better and better, and so I'll fast forward all the way to Keepers of the Ashes. That documentary, I believe they did a good job in some aspects, and I believe that they didn't do a good job in others. I believe that they did a good job of getting Mr. Harvey Pratt on there to talk about what happened and what really happened. Because I believe he was the only one that I trust in the law enforcement aspect of this. Because I believe he really had good intentions to catch him and wasn't trying to. He was just trying to do basic, honest police work. And one thing that not gonna, I guess, really, I find very interesting that the new Mays County Sheriff is pushing extra hard for this. And he's really doing, he's really going to the end. I think they came up with 30,000, I think 30,000 in donations to DNA tests. And essentially, they still could not exclude or point to Hart. This is why this is my first theory this is a theory that I've been kicking around for a while. And this is something that I think that, or not really my theory, but a theory that I've heard is that there was more than one person. Because there was a guy who, his name was Mike Stevens, I believe. He was in the same area, and they had seen him at Camp Scott the week before. But they also saw Gene Hart in the area as well. The flashlight that they found at the scene was a flashlight that Mike Stevens' friend said that Mike Stevens stole from him. And they said that he would give it back, and he never gave it back, and he was gone. He thought, and then that kind of connected him. Well, then one of the camp counselors who saw Mike Stevens out there, and they also saw Gene Hart out there. So one thing too that a lot of the community at the time, that when I was watching this documentary, that they did interviews with people in the community, they believed that this police force was targeting Gene Hart, and that's why he had such almost heroic type of coverage. Like, he was the man that was going against the government, and he was the one that was going to shed light on police corruption, with him basically not being caught. And to me, I just think that's very interesting when you add in that Mike Stevens story, but then also too, you add in the story from the camp counselor, Carla Wilhite, who found the girls. She had hurt her back. This is literally a week before. It was a Wednesday before the Girl Scout girls showed up, and they were getting it ready. They were putting stuff, and someone leaked these transcript of her saying, basically, they asked her the question, said, "Have you seen prowlers around?" She said, "Not really prowlers, but more of people just driving up and asking where they're at and asking for directions." And the defense team asked, "Well, what happened? Was anything unusual happen before?" And she goes, "Well, yeah. So one night," she's like, "I hurt my back, and I went to the counselor tent to lay down and kind of get it stretched out and kind of keep it straight so it'll be better the next day." And she said, "It sounded like I heard something rubbing against the tent, like it was scratching its back." And she stepped out and she said, "Hello, who's there? Anybody there?" And nothing said anything back. Well, she kind of could see the dog because there was lights up there because they were having some type of counselor party in the hall. And she saw the dog outside. She goes, "Hey, Sally." The dog's name was Sally, and the defense team asked, "Well, whose dog is that?" And they said, "Oh, it's the camp's. The dog the dog stays here during the summer times." She goes, "Sally, come on, girl," and calls her, and the dog gets about halfway and it starts growling. Starts really looking at something over there behind the tent. Well, she never understood why the dog did that, and so she ended up kind of making her way back to the party after she kind of stretched her back out and went back. Well, then they kept asking her questions because I guess she had forgot to mention that basically there was a 6-inch tear in the backside of the tent, and that's similar to what happened to those girls in the tent before. As there was that same 6-inch. Basically, it looked like they were trying to slowly cut the tent open from behind as she was facing forward, and the dog basically interrupted that. And I thought that was pretty interesting too. Another interesting thing that I thought is when, at the very beginning, when they started looking at suspects, and the rancher Schramm said that he had noticed that things were going missing in his barn. Well, come to find out, he started kind of watching, staying up late, and he started seeing more activity down his road. Like car lights would come on, and then they'd turn off, and it'd ride slowly up the road, so I guess no one could hear it. He started seeing a lot more activity. Well, then at that same time, a couple of the other counselors noticed that basically that doors are being broken open to, or like stuff is being moved around. I know I mentioned earlier the glasses were missing. So there was a lot of weird things going on. But to me, the thing that was very interesting when it comes to kind of my theory of what I think happened was the fact that evidence was showing up when they were already gone. So they brought in that security team. And one thing, too, that I found interesting, and I was trying to look to see if there's more detail on this, but the security team that was staying there to make sure that everything, and there was, like I said, I don't know how many guys in the security team. I'm assuming probably 4 at the most or at the least or whatever. But those guys, they were sitting out there one night and they were making rounds, and they come back and they said that one middle of the day, and they looked up and they saw a guy that looked like Gene Hart. And they looked, they said, "Oh my God, that's him, let's go get him." So they go, everyone chases after this shadow basically. They come back and the houses are broken, or those cabins that they had at the camp was broken into. It happened multiple times where they'd see someone off in the distance and they'd say, "Hey, you're trespassing, you can't be here," and they'd go and kind of follow them. And that's when they found those shoes. It was Denise Milner's shoes were found, soaking wet in a bag that wasn't an OSBI bag. So, there's weird different things about this case that I kind of watched, and I could see non-natives, they were kind of almost kind of scratching their head or their brain, but at the same time they were kind of like, we don't know what's going on. And I think that's one thing that when you talk about, the unexplained or medicine or shapeshifters, in that area is known for those things. And there's things that are on that campground, that those lands, things have been there a lot longer than that camp has been there. And when you, like I've talked about in episode 2, I believe, with the missing disappearances, which we'll get back to that too. That's another topic for that we're going to do another. It's going to be basically another set of disappearances, but it's going to be a different criteria. But that's what you see when those disappearances. It's almost like those dogs. They'll track for a while, then all of a sudden it's gone. And one thing too that some of the medicine people in that area at the time were saying was that they think that Hart was basically using medicine to spook and distract the cops, because some of the cops they were like, not really that wanting to be out in the middle of the night in the dark in this area that's got these spooky things running around. But there's, like I said, that case to me, for me personally, in my opinion of what happened. I mean, there's a few other things that occurred when he was in prison. I had heard, rumor, in the community, that you hear is that somebody poisoned him, and somebody got him out of here. They said maybe the prison guards, because of Weaver and OSBI basically trying to get him out of here so they could close the case. Another one was Crying Wolf mentioned in someone, someone crying for the children, or someone cried for the children. Is they had 4 medicine men show up to the court proceedings, going to try to get Leroy Hart some help. Gene Hart. I keep saying Leroy Hart. Gene Hart some help to kind of aid him through the trial. And they performed this ceremony that got them, basically they wanted to know the truth. Was he that guy or was it someone else? And they performed the ceremony secretly around the courthouse, and they placed this doctored tobacco basically in the 4 corners of the courthouse, and they called upon the Ancient One, is what they called it in the documentary. But And that's Cherokee stuff. But they call they do this ceremony, and he gets off, and he's basically just going back to prison. And Crying Wolf in the documentary, which kind of spooked me out a little bit, like I ain't gonna lie, it kind of made me kind of ooh, like, oh man, that's kind of. But he said everyone is like, we are gonna know the truth. He said, and the truth is that both sides were standing on the blood of those 3 girls. And I immediately kind of got like, whoa, like, oof. So if you look at the aftermath of this entire case over the years, and over the course of that year following, you had multiple OSBI agents resign. They left. Gone. You had the DA, a couple district attorneys, gone. Resigned. Got out of there. You had Leroy Hart, or Gene Hart passed. He was gone. Died. And multiple people that were involved with this investigation who might have done some things that weren't on the up and 100% good, gone. But Harvey Pratt remained, and Wilkerson remained. Those were the only 2 guys I believe were still, at that time of the documentary, were still doing anything. The families, they ended up creating Parents of Murdered Children. They ended up getting constitutional rights for victims of violent crimes. They went on to do great things, and they went on to ensure that these things don't happen. And unfortunately, at the time of a lot of that stuff, there's been things kind of getting worse. But after doing that ceremony, you could kind of tell that Crying Wolf was like, there was bloodshed. There was the blood standing on the blood of both sides. They were standing on those girls, and to me, it kind of made me think about the footprint that they found, the footprint that was different than the rest. I find that very interesting. But if you guys have any opinions or thoughts about this topic, like I said, this is the longest I've talked continuously on one topic. But that's one thing, like I said, this is a topic that's real prevalent, and it's always going to be prevalent. It'll be 100 years from now, and we will still be the lasting effects in the Cherokee Nation and on Cherokee Res, especially in Locust Grove, will always be around. And this is a case that growing up, I never understood the case. I never understood it. And here in the last probably 8 years, 5 years, I've really started to do a lot of digging, and I learned, I kind of learned some things when it comes to ceremonies and some medicine when it comes to the knowledge of that stuff, and what it's about. But I just find it real interesting that this case, and I said this at the beginning, but I'm going to say this at the end too. My thoughts and prayers are with those families who have lost their daughters. I think about I don't know what I would be. Hopefully I'd be as strong as them. Hopefully that never happens to me. But hopefully I'm can help in any way when it comes to maybe not getting awareness out there, but just letting people know that this stuff is still around, because this case is not talked about very much. It's only talked about on a non-native perspective. And I thought about it. I said, well, I did a lot of research. I said, man, there's not anyone native talking about this and what we think about it, or what the perception is here as someone who grew up 25 miles from that place. But hopefully, like I said, hopefully that you guys got some type of new knowledge, maybe not new knowledge, but new kind of understanding, or and some type of something from this. And hopefully, like I said, this is and I said this on Facebook. This episode is out of respect. I respect everything that people did, and I do respect the medicine that was used to find him and for him to. I respect all that stuff. I mean, no disrespect by this episode. But one thing that I'll say, this is the last thing I'm going to say about this case, is if you go watch Keeper of the Ashes, Christian Chenoweth was supposed to be at that camp and was supposed to be in that tent with those 3 girls. which is kind of wild if you look at it. She was in Four Christmases. Oops. She was in Four Christmases. She's been in a lot of stuff. She's kind of got that nasally voice. I think she's an opera singer. But Kristen Chenoweth was supposed to be in that tent that was her grouping with those 3 other girls. And so that is kind of a crazy fact. But I'll say about that documentary, man, after probably the 3rd episode, at the end they don't have the proof to basically nail Gene Hart to the wall on that he did it. So they go to about 5 or 7 minute stretch of Kristen Chenoweth singing a song she wrote for the victims. Don't get me wrong, great premise, great thought. I understand, but dude, if you want to talk about brutal, it's brutal. It's brutal. I was like, we were watching this. We were like, man, what is going on with this? Like, you basically tell us that you basically have the same findings as you did back in the 80s and 90s. It's inconclusive, and it somewhat points to him, but doesn't really. And then you go to a 7-minute montage of Kristen Chenoweth on the stage in Broken Arrow singing to nobody in the crowd. Like, there was nobody in the crowd. Like, it was just a blank. Like, nobody's there. It was like practice or whatever. But I just thought it was kind of funny to add that in there. But like my last comment, and then we'll get out of here. One thing that people in big cities don't understand, places like Oklahoma City, Tulsa, Bartlesville, Norman, places like that, where, and places out west, they don't understand what and how native spirituality, native medicine affects us natives on a daily basis, and affects us in a way that's different than anything that you've ever dealt with. And that's one thing that I noticed about every documentary and everything, is that these big city people, they have this disconnect with spirituality, real spirituality, being connected to the earth, being connected to, your family, being connected to things that matter. And to me, what the documentary, made me feel was, and made me kind of think about was, we're still doing these things. There's people out here that still, practicing and being traditional. And there's people out here that practice in a different way too. They don't practice they're not completely traditional, but they're not completely Western. But one thing I noticed, and I'll say this as a parting thought, is there was a quote that Stinjati, and I've said this on the live before, a TikTok live. You could take the savage out of the man. You can try that, but I will never be you. I will never want to be you. I will take what you give me. I will take the pain. I will take everything that you send my way, but I will never be what you want me to be. You guys can follow me on TikTok, One Man Band 918, Facebook, Yahola Tiger. I'm available everywhere: Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio. Go like that, subscribe. I appreciate everybody listening, and I'll catch you on the next one.